This episode contains discussions of rape, sexual assault, suicide, and also contains strong language. If you are struggling with your mental health, you can call Samaritans on 116 123. If you need someone to talk to about sexual violence, you can call Rape Crisis on 0808 500 2222.
Hello, guilty feminists. It's Matilda and Helena here from MediaStorm. If you haven't met us before, we bring you news through the lens of intersectional social justice. Basically, guilty feminist news. And sometimes we do special investigations just for you.
If you haven't, you need to get involved with our back catalogue. We explore unseen corners of society, from sex worker resistance cells to reformed neo-Nazi anti-recruiters to drug dealers to much more. We meet the people populating them and discover the roles they all play in our lives. One of our very first investigations asked the unasked question in rape justice: what happens to the 98%? We trace the fates of the vast majority of rapes that never make it to trial but are ultimately abandoned by law enforcement.
Today, we speak to the lucky ones, and I say that in inverted commas. The 2% of rape victims who get the chance to go to court, a chance for fair and open justice. Or do they? The problem is how costly it currently is for victims to access their own court transcripts, i.e. written records of what was said in the 2% of reported rape cases that actually make it to the courtroom. You see, for a range of reasons, victims of rape and serious sexual assault may want a record of what went on in their trials.
Yeah, of course. It can help them achieve closure, to understand the outcome, especially if somebody is found not guilty, which, as we explored in our last investigation, is so difficult to establish in instances of rape due to the inherent lack of court-approved evidence.
Closure's a huge factor.
And I also guess they would want to know what's happening in those trials to assure them that lawyers and judges can be held accountable if they don't follow the proper course of the law or if they say inappropriate things during the trial, because we've all heard horror stories about how rape victims get treated in court.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, we have an open justice system. That's cool. But there's one reason you might not guess. I mean, I was surprised. And that's because in most cases, transcripts are a survivor's only way of knowing what happens in their trial, because they are being pressured by police and by prosecutors not to actually attend their own trial other than for cross-examination.
Why on earth?
I mean, I was confused, and, I've sort of speculated about whether it's supposed to sway juries.
Or to protect them, maybe. Or to protect their emotions, maybe.
Or to protect their emotions, exactly. But as we always say, better to just ask the people this is happening to. They are more than capable of advocating for themselves, as we'll find out when we do get to the solutions part of this episode.
Okay, so just to backtrack for a second, victims are being told not to witness their own trials. But if they want to know what happened, there are written transcripts of everything said that they can access.
Mm-hmm. Although they do have to pay for those transcripts themselves.
Okay, I mean, that's a bit mean, I guess, but how much are we talking, like?
Well, how much do you think would be fair?
Well, I think it'd be fair if they didn't have to pay for them at all. But I guess if they have to pay maybe like 20 quid max.
Oh my goodness. I'm talking 20,000 quid.
What?
Yeah, I've heard a range of prices quoted, the lowest being 7,000 and the highest being £22,000 by one of our sources for the transcript of her daughter's trial. That is the level of intransparency we're talking about here.
I've basically just been shocked into silence.
Mm-hmm. And behind this enterprise is a government contract worth £17 million, given to 6 companies revealed to MediaStorm via Freedom of Information, some of whose accounts show gross profits in the tens of millions.
So is this a situation of companies getting rich off of victims' desperation?
Maybe. Or could it come down to something else, like judicial transparency? If these trials are being kept behind closed doors, is it because someone wants to keep it that way?
I guess we need to take a look inside.
You may not like what you see.
What do you mean this happened to me?
If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has
And
ways
if I
to
have
try
to
to shut
listen
that
to one more gray-faced man with a $2 haircut explain to me what rape is,
You can do anything. Whatever you want. Grab him by the pussy.
We are the culprits.
Elsie Smith, Kelly Stewart, Gwendolyn Barry.
Welcome to this special episode of The Guilty Feminist.
I'm Matilda Mallinson.
And I'm Helena Warrior.
This week's investigation, rape off the record. What happens to the 2%?
The crime itself was horrific, but how I was dealt with by the police and the justice legal system was much worse.
Media Storm old-timers may remember one of our very first investigations. Rape justice. What happens to the 98%?
What the government did and didn't do in those cases showed such a severe neglect to the criminal point.
In it, we explored the fates of the vast majority of rape investigations that are dropped by police or prosecutors without ever making it to trial. Today, we look at the remaining 2%, those that make the final bid for justice.
when I found out that he'd been charged, I couldn't believe it. I remember writing something like, "Karma's finally come to visit him." And I felt really strong and I felt really proud of myself. And I knew that he'd been violent to other women. I knew that he, according to the police, is a persistent perpetrator of domestic abuse. And so I felt like I was doing it for other women. I felt I was one of the lucky ones.
Today, we talk to the lucky ones and find out why beating the odds may not always be a win.
Like so many other people, I reported him to protect other people. And going to court, it didn't protect anybody.
This is an investigation into how victims and how women are treated by the institutions responsible for justice.
I'm in a much, much worse place now than I was even leading up to the trial, because leading up to the trial, I felt hopeful.
This is an investigation into transparency, a question whether open justice truly exists. Many victims have come to us and told us it does not. They tell us rape and sexual assault victims are pressured by prosecutors and the police not to witness their own trials. There is no way to watch these trials from outside the courtroom, but trials are recorded and transcribed, so if they ever want to know what happened in their trial, all they have to do is get the transcript. Except they have to pay for it themselves. And let me give you a moment to guess how much you think that should cost. How much did your transcript cost?
£7,500 for a 10-day trial.
We were quoted 22,000.
Around £7,000.
Is shocking.
Yeah, it just feels too much, especially to pay for something that is going to be quite traumatising. And it just feels like a kind of slap in the face.
Even if they can and do purchase the transcripts of their own trials, these can come with unexplained redactions.
They've told me we cannot have 2 hours.
Exclusions that conceal not just what the defendant said, but lawyers and judges too.
I have a bit of a stammer. I mean, that only started once I reported it to the police. I never had a stammer before, but sometimes when I'm talking about this, I do stammer.
Really?
Yeah, it's a trauma response, I've been told.
Well,
Yeah.
then, I think it might be an important part of the story.
Yeah, okay.
Sinead asks me to give her a pseudonym, Sinead, as she shares with me the story of her past relationship, one she describes as coercive and characterised by rape. Like every woman we speak to in this investigation, Sinead was told by authorities not to attend her trial except for her own cross-examination.
I was advised by the investigating officer that no one's ever wanted to listen to the rest of the trial. I was told it would look odd. I just felt that it was something that they didn't approve of, like I was being difficult, for wanting to sit and listen to what was being said about me. And so I just did as I was told.
You said that you were told no one else would want to sit on their case, but I've spoken to a number of women who did want to sit on their case and were given the same advice.
They just said it wouldn't look good for the jury to see you there.
Yeah, but the jury might look at you like you're not scared or you're not a victim.
Of course, you're very vulnerable and you do everything you can to abide by the rules.
So do you feel that you were pressured into not wanting it? And do you feel it was the right decision for you looking back?
I definitely felt under pressure not to. And because I've not seen the transcripts and because the CPS have not answered all my questions, in hindsight, yes, I wish I was there. I was told also that for my own well-being, it would be better if I wasn't there. I've since decided that I know what's best for my well-being, not a police officer. She doesn't know what's best for my well-being because my well-being has been hugely impacted by not being informed.
And whose well-being do you actually think it was for, you not being in the trial?
It was probably better for the jury that I wasn't there. They had to make, obviously, a very difficult decision. And I would imagine it was much better for the defendant that I wasn't there because I didn't listen to all his lies. So he was able to lie without me being there. It was better for the judge. I just feel it was better for everybody that I was out of the way. It was almost like a we know best. You go home, dear, and have a cup of tea. And when we've made all these very important decisions, we'll let you know. So you just go home and, just be good. I was at home. I got a phone call from my SOIT who was in court. She just said, I'm really sorry. It's not guilty. I stammer now as a kind of, it's a trauma response. I didn't used to stammer. I never stammered before, but whenever I talk about this, I stammer. I remember asking her, well, what kind of protection will I have now because he's not on bail anymore? And she said, you won't have any.
That must have been devastating. And I'm sure that you were confused about how that had happened in the trial. Were you aware at that time that you wouldn't really get to know what led to that sentence?
I was really confused that nobody from the CPS or the prosecutor, there was no conversation. And I was like, I was in shock. And actually, I think I still am in shock, even though it's nearly 2 years later. It feels strange knowing that anybody sitting in the public gallery could know more about my case than I do. Surely I can't be the only person that has questions after a trial. So I wrote to the CPS and I had lots of questions. And eventually I was told very patronisingly, it's not useful to speculate. I found the whole process quite controlling. The CPS use similar tactics to my abuser, which is to not answer questions that they don't like and to gaslight you. So I was very familiar with that kind of behaviour and I found it very, very triggering because I'd left a relationship where that happened. And then, 3 years later, I'm dealing with the CPS and guess what? They're doing it too and they're getting paid for it.
Do you feel that if you were able to access those transcripts and to read what happened, that it would bring you some closure?
It would bring me some closure because right now I don't know anything. I don't know how he was questioned. I don't know whether the judge was fair. I have no idea. It would be very traumatizing to read it, but at least I'd be informed. Maybe I'd think, oh, the judge was fair. The prosecutor really did, he was good. I don't know, I don't know what anybody said. I don't know anything.
Victims do have the right to attend their trials if they're bold enough to ignore officials' advice, but they may still be left with questions.
I want my court transcripts to be able to even understand what went on during the trial. I have no recollection It was such a traumatic experience. I was so nervous. I was so stressed. I was next to him. For me, the court transcripts would be essential to process everything that happened and get closure and move on.
Juliana Terlizzi was instrumental in bringing a rapist to justice after her boyfriend assaulted her in 2020.
Today is the anniversary of when the sexual assault happened 4 years ago.
For what he did to her, he is currently serving an 18-year prison sentence.
He says in the video, "I'm completely raping you while we were asleep and unconscious and making a video of it as well."
Given the evidence, a video recording in which he raped her while verbally bragging about raping her, Juliana thought a guilty verdict would be a given.
It's shocking what barristers are allowed to say to victims. I have a few recollection of the most traumatic moments for me. For example, when his barrister tried to argue that because I was unconscious, the rape wasn't traumatic at all. Oh, she started the cross-examination saying, "You love sex, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I enjoy sex, but does that mean that I get to be raped by my boyfriend?" They will try to humiliate you and intimidate you and spark any kind of doubt in the jury. I'm like, how can you deny something happened if it's on video? I just thought that the whole process was a waste of public money. I had to have my life on hold for 2 freaking years just waiting, not going out, scared. I couldn't get treatment because the barristers could ask for my therapy notes and use that against me. There's a lack of accountability to those working in the legal system, and that needs to change. I would like to have evidence of how I was treated in the courtroom.
Neither Sinead nor Juliana could afford their transcripts, and they have been left without the answers they so desperately seek.
I'm still stuck. I still suffer from PTSD. I still have difficulties leaving my house, and I feel like I've been denied the right to heal.
But desperate people go to desperate measures.
I wanted the transcript because I really wanted to see what had gone on and why my daughter was suicidal after giving evidence.
Hell hath no fury like a mother scorned. And thanks to one such mother, MediaStorm has been given access to a transcript that reveals what's happening in these trials. You mentioned that your daughter was suicidal. Was that as a result of the cross-examination in the trial, or was it a result of the events that had led to the trial?
It was because of how she was treated in the trial. I wanted to understand the questioning that would make somebody feel so bad about themselves.
We're also using a pseudonym for Victoria, since we'll be quoting painful moments from her daughter's trial and want to protect her privacy. And how much did your transcript cost?
We were quoted £22,000.
£22,000. She showed us the breakdown given to her by the company that transcribed her daughter's trial, after the original £22,000 was reduced because another buyer paid for the transcription of some of those pages. The final quote charges £10.7 thousand for 15 days of the trial, consisting of 280 pages of transcription. That's £40 per page. And when I look through the transcripts, I'm surprised to see each page consists of a couple dozen lines of dialogue only. So it's about £2 for every single statement said in the trial. You can see how that really starts to rack up. And it's worth adding that 20% of this cost is VAT, meaning victims must not only pay for their own transcripts, they must also pay tax on those transcripts. Through Freedom of Information, MediaStorm has a list of companies contracted by the government to deliver court transcripts. We've analysed the financial records of one of the top providers, which imply they're charging buyers 4 to 5 times what it costs them to produce their services. These are remarkably high, impressive profit margins.
Hello, Guilty Feminists. This is Deborah, just popping in with a few quick announcements. We are coming to the Edinburgh Fringe. We're doing 3 shows at the Gilded Balloon in the museum on the 12th, the 13th and the 14th of August at 7:40 p.m. And we have an incredible lineup for you. On the 12th of August, Catherine Bohart and I will be talking to Helen Bauer, and there will be poetry from Vanessa Kasule, a favourite of mine. On the 13th of August, Kate Checker and I will be talking to Emma Siddy, and there will be music from Isabel Rogers. And finally, on the 14th, it will be me and Chloe Petts talking to Lara Racote with music from Katie Norris. As you can see, every show will be different, so why not come to all three? You can book now by going to guiltyfeminist.com and clicking on live shows. And speaking of shows, which are different every night, we're also producing the amazing storytelling show 16 Postcodes, which is at the Pleasance Courtyard every day at 3:30 p.m. Jessica Regan has lived in 16 different postcodes since moving to London from Ireland 20 years ago. And every day, audience members will help her to choose which stories she tells. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll rent, because you won't be able to afford to buy. If you've lived in any number of flats or postcodes, or you sometimes feel a bit adrift, this show is for you. To book tickets, go to edfringe.com and search for 16 Postcodes. And we'll be back in London on the 8th of September at King's Place as part of the London Podcast Festival. And our old friend Jessica Foster-Q and I will be talking to the very wonderful, very glamorous Dawn O'Porter about her new novel, Honeybee. Once again, for tickets, go to guiltyfeminist.com and click on live shows. If you want an ad-free version of this show, you can get it by going to patreon.com/guiltyfeminist and supporting us from as little as £2.50 a month. You can also do the same with Acast Plus or Apple Podcasts. And if you felt like leaving us a 5-star review, we would love you forever. It helps other people find the podcast, and that is a good thing.
I'm reading through the transcription of Victoria's Daughter, and it's tough to read because it plays into pretty much every victim-blaming trope I would script if I was writing a parody about patriarchy. One by one, the prosecutor lists off to the jury all of the dating apps Victoria's Daughter has been on. He proceeds to ask her about her history with other men, including the exchanging of photographs. He presses her about her sexual fantasies and whether she's ever expressed an interest in BDSM. The hardest part reading this is the extreme distress tangible in the daughter's words, even just reading them on paper. She's made to feel like she has to defend her right not to be raped with statements like, "I was never that wild sexually." She is made to feel like she must justify her decision to send suggestive photos by saying, "I was very insecure." And yet, in spite of this humiliating treatment, Victoria's Daughter does at times find the courage to stand up for herself. She says, someone can want to have sex one day and the next day say no. It isn't okay. She says, do you know what? You can have an interest in exploring things. When the relationship becomes very violent, it doesn't mean it's okay. It feels like the front line of the victim-blaming debate is happening in courts between women who say that they've been attacked and the lawyers defending the accused. And what came from this line of questioning?
It was 3 rapes, 3 ABHs, and coercion and control. And he was found guilty of coercion and control. Nothing else. He'd been on remand, been let out on bail, and kept breaking his bail conditions. So actually, he only had 7 days left to do by the time he was sentenced. I would really like to talk to this judge and say, how could you put someone through this?
Victoria does not feel justice was served, but she won't take it lying down.
I'm standing outside Liverpool Crown Court. It's freezing, it's blowing a gale, and I'm not enjoying it at all. I'm outside the Warwickshire Crown Court, which is in Leamington Spa.
I thought, what can I do? So I thought I would go and visit every Crown Court in England this year and stand outside with my flag saying, hold judges to account.
6 Crown Courts down, another 62 to go.
I think it's my way of kind of coping with this terrible situation. It's done terrible things to our family. You know, I just believe it's so wrong. End of, yeah.
Now, the core issue here isn't just the healing process of the victims, though that certainly is cause in itself. This is a question of transparency in justice. Hello, look who's coming to lie. Hi, Freddie.
She's a therapy dog.
So for listeners who pick up on any interesting snoring sounds, that's just Freddie having a snooze in Charlotte's lap. Which takes us on to our final story, and some lessons in how, if you've been so moved by these stories, you can get involved.
I would have been 23, first job, straight out of uni. This man who, how should I refer?
As long as there's no identifying details, you can call him whatever you want.
The cunt bag.
Yeah, you can call him the cunt bag.
We were in a relationship for 2.5 years, and he abused me throughout that period.
Introducing Charlotte.
I want to have my court transcript because through some notes that the CPS gave me, the judge apparently said that I was unreliable because I waited 8 months to report the crime, and I want to hold her accountable for such misconception.
And how much would it have cost you to access that transcript?
Well, I was actually seen in a magistrate's court, so they don't even record your actual trial there. So I wasn't able to get them because they don't have them.
In the UK, magistrates' courts deal with supposedly less serious criminal offence than Crown courts. And they hear cases without a jury. Can you explain to us, Charlotte, why your trial took place in a magistrates' court?
So my perpetrator was charged with coercive control. The crime of rape was dropped. The crime of coercive control is a either way offence, and that means that it can be seen in a Crown court or a magistrate's court, and the defendant gets to pick which one he wants to go to.
What was the ultimate sentence?
He was found not guilty. He walked out of that court that day. The police and the CPS refused any restraining orders. The judge said, "You spoke to other victims of domestic abuse, so you knew exactly what to say." Why are they saying such awful things about victims? I want answers.
Now, when I spoke to the courts about the lack of availability of transcripts, the issue that they raised was financial and the costs of getting transcripts. In your view, are there other reasons that court transcripts are not easily accessible?
Judges don't want the transcripts to get out because they can do and say what they want, and they are literally protected. The wider issue is the entire criminal justice system. We call it an open justice system, but it's not. We know that regularly people are stopped from watching it in a gallery. They won't hand out a live link. If you ask for your transcripts, a judge can say no. If you're heard in a magistrate's court, there are no transcripts.
And that brings us on to your campaign. Will you tell us about Open Justice?
Yes, a couple of victims and survivors and myself started a campaign called Open Justice for All. We're actually on a WhatsApp group raging about all of the things that happened within all of our trials. And I decided to set up a petition to get transcripts for free. At that point, Claire, the London Victims Commissioner, picked up and said, this is something I've been campaigning for the Victims Bill.
The Victims Bill is a piece of proposed legislation that London's Victims Commissioner, Claire Waxman, began campaigning for more than a decade ago. It is designed to enshrine victims' rights into law, so that if they are violated, consequences must be paid. It is finally making its way through Parliament. But last month, both the Conservatives and Labour opposition refused to back an amendment to the bill that would allow victims of rape and sexual assault to get free transcripts and summaries of even parts of their trials. The cost to the government is given as their reason. The Ministry of Justice told MediaStorm that they have announced a pilot scheme enabling victims of rape and other serious sexual offences to request Crown Court sentencing remarks free of charge. Sentencing remarks summarise the main points of the case, but they are only produced after guilty verdicts, leaving 40% of victims alleging rape without any recourse. The pilot scheme does not include magistrates' courts. So what do the victims think should be done?
There's a couple of asks in there, with one of them being free court transcripts. The other request we're making is magistrates to start recording trials. We want the CPS and the police to stop advising people not to attend their own trials. What we need is as much backing as possible. So the way that anyone can help is to go onto the website, which is openjusticeforall.com, and use the pre-written template to write to your MP.
For listeners, we will post the website in the show notes below and share links on our social media.
Reporting a crime like rape and coercive control is often more traumatizing than the actual crime itself. The way that victims are treated in courts are vile. You are constantly chasing answers, you're always one step behind the perpetrator, and they are being treated better than the victims are. We need to support our victims better, but the way that the system is at the moment, I would never ever report a crime again.
Before we leave you today, we just wanted to share that all of the women you've heard from in this episode are working together in a campaign calling for open justice for them, for me, for you. Open justice for all.
It's just amazing that a group of women who have been touched in one way or the other through violence have been able to unite and call for this change. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak about this. We couldn't be able to if there wasn't anyone listening.
Thank you so much for listening. Before we go, here's a shout out to our Patreon supporters for making investigations like today's possible. If you valued this episode, please consider supporting us following the Patreon link in the show notes.
Funds go directly towards our investigations, and we've got a few of those cooking. Some mini ones, like today, as well as a great, big, juicy one, which will be hitting this feed as a limited series.
And at Media Storm, we really mean it when we say that every penny counts. So thank you to all our patrons, and thank you to our new supporters at Goalhanger, and thank you all for listening.
Follow Media Storm wherever you get your podcasts so that you can get access to new episodes as soon as they drop. If you like what you hear, share this episode with someone and leave us a 5-star rating and a review. It really helps more people discover the podcast, and our aim is to have as many people as possible hear these voices.
Media Storm is an award-winning podcast produced by Helena Warrior and Matilda Mallinson, with music from Samphire. You can follow us on social media at Matilda Mal, at Helena Warrior, and follow the show via at Media Storm Pod.
Listen and hit follow on Spotify.